Welcome to the Top Business Leaders Show, powered by Rise 25 Media. We feature top founders, executives, and business leaders from all over the world.
Chad Franson here, co-host of the Top Business Leaders Show, where we feature CEOs, entrepreneurs, and top leaders in the business world. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. We help B2B businesses reach their dream relationships and connect with more clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships, and get ROI through Done For You podcasts. If you have a B2B business and want to build great relationships, there's no better way to profile people and companies that you admire on your podcast. To learn more, go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25media.com. Kyle Ewing started his career as a management consultant after graduating from the University of Denver with a BSBA and an MBA. His first venture into entrepreneurship was an outdoor lifestyle company that he made a successful exit from in 2014. He founded his current company, TerraSlate, in 2015 and has grown it from his basement into a multimillion-dollar corporation that does business in over 85 countries around the world. Kyle, thanks so much for joining me. How are you?
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Chad.
Hey, so tell me about the start of your career when you were a management consultant. How did you enjoy that? And how did that kind of go at the beginning?
I really liked being a management consultant, to be honest. It was only about half of what I had expected to be before the job. You know, I had seen the movies with George Clooney and whatnot about management consulting, where they take private jets all the time and they go in and fire everybody. That really wasn't the case in either of those circumstances. But what I did get to do is work with a lot of very high level people at global multinational companies. So I got a lot of exposure to how those people operate, what type of businesses they run, and the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis.
When you got your MBA from the University of Denver, were you already working as kind of a management consultant, or did that happen afterward?
There was actually a case competition, and the winner got an internship with the consulting firm. And then if they liked you, they had the option to hire you on. So that's how it happened. And I took the job with them. The company was called Sancherry Associates, and they immediately had me flying out to Philadelphia and New York City from Denver every week to work on site at the client's offices.
Wow. So you won the case competition?
I did. Yeah. What's funny now is that it was modeled after The Apprentice. And so it was a local made for TV kind of a thing for graduate students. And one of my friends had strong armed me into joining. We had been teammates on a whole bunch of things. And he said, you ought to do this one too. And I said, you know, we've done so many of these this year. I'm thrilled, but I'm going to let this one go. And he's like, you ought to do it. And so when I said, okay, fine. He said, that's great because I already submitted your resume and put your application in.
What kind of case was it?
It was a case about building wind farms off the coast of Cape Cod, which actually just got built. So that was, I don't know how many years ago now, but kind of still relevant now when I see the news updates about it.
Wow, very cool. So what were your goals when you were pursuing an MBA? Did you always know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur, or were you just figuring it out as you go?
I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't know the exact path to it. And then about halfway through my undergraduate degree, I thought that I wanted to be an attorney. Both my parents are attorneys. And my wife, who's now my wife, Ashley, she's also an attorney, and I thought I was going to follow that path. But what was funny is they all told me, don't be an attorney, go to business school. And so I took that advice after having lunch with the chancellor of DU and having him confirm the same thing. Hey, you don't want to go to law school. There's too many attorneys. Go to business school. That's what you like. You can be an entrepreneur if you want. And the reason for getting an MBA was really that DU offered a program that was very advantageous, where you could effectively skip the first year of graduate school. If you had the grades and test scores, they would allow you to do that. So I took advantage of that program, and it really worked out well for me. I liked it a lot.
So you were working as a consultant. When did you finally decide to branch out on your own, and what kind of led to that?
I had been traveling back and forth to the East Coast Monday to Friday or Sunday to Thursday every week. And I did that for about 3 years. and decided I wanted to be at home more. And so I took a job with a different company in the tech center whose headquarters was actually in Chicago, but they had a satellite office here in Denver. And I worked there for a couple of years, really liked it. But at one point, the company decided they were rolling up all the satellite offices back to their Chicago home base. And they made me a nice offer to move, but I politely declined and decided that that was the step or the piece that would kick me out the door of the business world, and I would become an entrepreneur. So I will say that I was too nervous to do it initially, and I applied for jobs at other consulting firms, which then after I got a little bit of courage, didn't take and became an entrepreneur. So 9909 was my personal entrepreneurial Independence Day.
What was your, congratulations. That's exciting. What was your first venture?
My first venture was called Guerrilla Tags ID Systems. And what we made were a set of dog tags or a bracelet or something you would lace into your shoes. That way, if you and I went out hiking or running or kayaking and something were to happen to one of us, the other one could immediately find out who our emergency contacts were and who to call in case of an emergency. Their emergency contacts, so they would know who to call, and your medical allergies so that their first responders would know how to treat you. And it's been too long since I've given that pitch.
Was that your own idea?
You know, it was not an original idea. What we did is we made a better version of something that was already on the market. And then I eventually sold the company, and I'm not allowed to say who to, but it was to a competitor of ours in the same space.
In what ways did you see that company grow? Was it from zero to full-fledged?
It was, yeah. I was making the products on my back porch. I had a condo by DU, and I bought a grinding machine. And much to the dismay of my neighbors, I was grinding these tags by hand. And then I had this engraving machine that I would put them in once I shaped them. And it started to pick up, and we had to develop some new ways of getting the product to people. I wasn't really able to hand cut them all myself, but that was a good lesson in logistics and manufacturing out of necessity. Like, okay, we have to get these done and made and out the door right away. There's no possible way I can do this by myself in the next 24 hours. So learned how to source vendors, basically.
So tell me about a time where maybe, obviously you're starting like a lot of people start on their patio or whatever. Tell me about a time when you were like, okay, this is going strong. Like, I'm successful at this company.
I think the day that I felt that way was when I got my first corporate order. So there was a company sponsoring 300 or 400 of their employees to do a 5K run walk at Thanksgiving. And they wanted to buy a Guerrilla tag for each person. And so once we got that order, I sort of felt like and had the confidence to say, we've made it, we're on the map now. People know who we are. We can deliver an order like that. I'm not hand grinding them all. And the customer was very happy. And that's really the key is if you can make one big customer happy, you can reach out to all the other customers in their space, or all of their competitors in that space and say, hey, Chad, we did a great job for these guys. They did this and that. We helped them solve that problem, or we produced these products for them. We'd love to do the same thing for you. And that really is what got us moving forward with real velocity.
When you were running that business, did this idea for TerraSlate, was that kind of percolating in your mind at the time?
I actually hadn't thought of TerraSlate until after I had sold Guerrilla Tags. It was a product that I was creating, but only out of necessity for a different product. So at TerraSlate, what we make is waterproof paper. You basically can put it in any laser printer or copy machine, click print, and the paper comes out completely waterproof and rip-proof. You don't have to laminate it afterwards. And I really developed the material because I wanted to sell backup copies of your passport. So during my undergraduate time at DU, my friends all lost their passports the night before they were supposed to fly home from studying abroad. And that became a big problem because they couldn't get new passports at the embassy without a way to prove their identification. And they needed a passport to get a passport. And so I helped them with that, but then realized that there's got to be a better way to do this, because a photocopy really isn't that useful, because it'll easily rip or wear, and then the embassy may or may not take it. So I wanted to create a backup copy of your passport that you could take scuba diving, you could take it hiking in the rainforest, you could fold it up and unfold it a million times. And if you ever needed to use it, it would be there and be ready to perform for you.
So I pursued and received an MBA at DU, and not once did I take a class on how to make ultra durable paper. How did you just come up with these things, even though you found that it was a necessity? How did you learn how to make it?
It's a great question, because you're right, there isn't a class at DU, but I'll keep on them after talking to you about it. The way that you create a product when you don't have an engineering degree, which I don't know anything about, or didn't at the time know anything about chemical engineering. And so what I did is I called the smartest person I knew and I said, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Who do you know that I should reach out to? And he put me in touch with somebody who put me in touch with another person. And eventually I got to a chemical engineer who said, okay, I might be able to do this, but it's going to be expensive and I can't guarantee any results. And so that was kind of the situation where I said, okay, let's give it a shot and see what happens.
So you started in your basement after you spoke to this person that you knew. Tell me about kind of the early days, the early part of the process.
Yeah, it took us about 10 iterations and a whole year to get the product right. The first version we made was basically like a plastic sheet, but it wasn't flexible and it was incredibly brittle. You could break pieces off of it. So that obviously wouldn't work because you can't print that. And then the next iteration was flexible, but it melted in my printer. I had like a desktop printer and it seized because the material just melted inside of it. And then after that, we had one that was flexible and heat resistant, but then the toner wouldn't stick to it. So then back to the drawing board, we have one that's flexible, that's heat resistant, that toner will stick to. And then, a couple more iterations down the line, and we had something that worked really, really well. So that's kind of how it got developed. In manufacturing, there's typically a minimum order quantity or a minimum production run. And so that first production run was 100,000 sheets, which is, and I didn't have an office. So I stored it in the basement of my house, and it was basically floor to ceiling in the entire basement. And I still thank my wife for that, because we didn't have use of that basement for almost a year after I filled it up.
What kind of mindset would you say an entrepreneur needs to have when you're just starting off and you're kind of running through different iterations and maybe some things don't always go right? What kind of a mindset do you need to have?
I think it all comes down to execution and follow through. I mean, I can't stress that enough. The road is littered with good ideas. Everybody's had one, but the truth is an idea isn't valuable until you execute on it. And once you have a product that's great and it works, you're really only halfway there, because once you've sold one to your mom and to your friends out, and they'll buy it out of pity, you got to sell it to people that you don't know. And that's the hard part. And my best piece of advice for entrepreneurs is get on the phone and start selling it. Call anybody you know and say, hey, Chad, I'd love to send you some of these products. I just created waterproof paper. I have no idea what you're going to use it for, but stick it in your printer and let me know what you think. And then maybe you get a customer, because he'll say, hey, that worked pretty well. I don't know what to use it for, but I could say, well, it works really well for teachers, because teachers laminate lots of materials and they can skip the step and put it on the wall. It takes them a lot less time. And you say, oh, as a matter of fact, I actually know a teacher down here. And I get his or her number and I send them some samples. So work that cell phone. We almost all have an unlimited cell phone plan these days. And that's the cheapest way to get your product out there. You don't need to spend money on ads. You don't need anything fancy. You need a cell phone and 1 or 2 hours a day of straight cold calling.
And that's what you did with TerraSlate?
That's exactly right. My first customer was an oil and gas guy. He had actually bought 3 of these passports that I was making. And he said, hey, Kyle, I like this paper. I bought it for my 3 girls traveling abroad, but how do you print it? And can I just buy the paper? And I said, yeah, you can print it with any laser printer or stick it in the coffee machine. And he said, okay, cool. I'd love to buy a case. And, I'm trying to get rid of this stuff at this point. So I said, that's perfect because it's 2-for-1 Tuesday and I'm going to get you 2 cases shipped out today. And the funny part was I forgot to ask him what he was using it for. So 2 weeks later, when he called back to place another order, I said, hey, what are you using it for? If you don't mind me asking. And he said, I'm actually an oil and gas guy. And we have our engineers out in the field and they drive trucks here, there, and everywhere. And we actually put a printer in the passenger seat so that they can print out their materials in real time and use them. And what's nice about TerraSlate for them is that it doesn't matter if they have bad weather that day, if they have greasy fingers, they're out there working hard. Like these are rough, tough guys, and regular paper just falls apart. So they loved TerraSlate for that application.
I'm guessing.
And to answer your question, pardon me. Yeah. From there, I said, who else do you know in the industry that I had to reach out to? And he was like, oh, you got to call Dave over here and you got to call Charles and Susan there down there. And so I did. I said, hey, I'm making this product. It's working well for this guy. Let me send you some samples and tell me what you think. And then they became customers as well.
I'm guessing that question, what are you using it for? That was probably one of the most important questions you've ever asked somebody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And at first I was pretty fearful to ask because I was like, well, what if he says, well, I don't want to buy it anymore, or I'm not telling you. And I don't know why that fear was there, but looking back, it's totally irrational. It's a fair question. You have a new product and I don't know what he's using it for. And I think the way a founder or an entrepreneur could pitch it is, hey, I'm so glad you like the product. I'd love to learn more about how you use it and why it works for you. And we'll use your feedback to incorporate for new iterations as we make them in the future. Or you could just tell them seriously, hey, I'm looking for new customers. I got a lot of inventory here in my basement. My wife's looking for me to get it out of the house. Who should I reach out to? And people are really kind when you're forthright with them. They often want to help you. So take advantage of that when you can.
What were some of the biggest turning points that you kind of experienced as TerraSlate was growing?
Getting a production level printer. That was kind of the key next step. I was using this desktop laser printer. It was about $100 at Office Max. And I was pounding several hundred sheets through that a day and realized this thing just isn't fast enough. So I got a production level printer delivered also to my house. So at this point, I'm taking over the main room in the house and the basement. And that really helped me keep up with the print demand. And then shortly thereafter, I realized I can't be hand cutting every sheet with this guillotine paper trimmer or cutter I had on my desk. And so I took out a loan from Wells Fargo and bought a $20,000 cutting machine that would cut automatically for me. And those were 2 pretty big milestones because they allowed me to go from hand making it to a little bit of automation. And that basically quintupled my capacity overnight.
Was there any kind of a mistake that turned out to be a good thing? Like you learned a lot from it that you can really remember? Like I learned a lesson from that.
Yeah, so many examples, I almost don't know where to start. But the key when you make a mistake is to remember that you learned something and that was a pretty good opportunity to move forward. And the mistakes can be expensive and they're soul crushing. I'll be the first one to admit that. But the key is to say, okay, now that I know that, I'm never going to make that mistake again. And with that knowledge, what can I do to leverage this play going forward? How can I double up so that I can not only cover the loss I just created for myself, but I'm also going to make more money on it? And so that was kind of my thought throughout. Anytime there's a mistake, let's learn from that. Let's make sure that we don't let that happen again in our process and figure out how we can use it to make more money, if at all possible.
Were there any other entrepreneurial endeavors besides the 2 that we've spoken about that maybe didn't quite take off?
Yeah, absolutely. I created a company called Testline. And this company, we had an app like Uber and like Lyft, but it was for electric cars only. So we drove all Tesla Model X's and people could basically summon a car anytime, day or night. We did a lot of trips from Denver to Vail and Denver to Aspen and all over Colorado. And it was a cool company. People really loved the service because it was a premium service priced not much higher than Uber and Lyft. The difficulty was that it wasn't very profitable and scale was infinitely expensive. The Tesla Model X's that we were buying were like $118,000 or $120,000 a piece. And we kept needing more cars. And then we basically needed 12 drivers per car to fill a week because you have 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. And then you got to have a couple backups. Otherwise, it's me flying off to the garage at 4 a.m. to go pick up a car to then drive to the airport, to then drive to Aspen and then all the way back and then try to do my real job. So that company was pretty fun and cool, but it was a heartache in so many ways. And eventually I decided to close it. And that was about $175,000 loss for me personally. So I took that as an expensive add-on to my MBA education.
What was maybe one or two takeaways that you took from that? You know, sometimes those experiences, while painful, like you just said, can be incredibly valuable. What were some lessons that maybe you learned?
Right. The key lesson I learned was don't start a business that has to operate 24 hours a day, because when you're starting out, the buck stops with you as the founder. So if you're not going to be prepared to drive all those legs in the middle of the night because your driver didn't show up or canceled, do something else. So don't start something like that. And then don't start something that costs a ton of money to scale. So versus TerraSlate, where when I sell one sheet of paper, I can afford to make two more. But with one ride in Testline, I could basically cover the cost of the ride and a little tiny bit of overhead, but no money was going to the future car. So I was just having to come up with cash, $120,000 at a time. And that got exhausting pretty quickly. So start a business if you can, that you don't have to operate 24 hours a day. It can have normal business hours, and it's not hugely capital intensive.
When you think of yourself, do you think of yourself as the head of a paper manufacturing company or as a serial entrepreneur? More likely.
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess that would depend on my audience. If I'm talking to somebody that's a customer, I'm a paper guy, through and through. But the truth is that I'm passionate about a lot of things. And I never grew up thinking like, great, I'm going to start a really successful paper company in a digital world. Like that just never crossed my mind. And I think serial entrepreneur is the more accurate response, because I'm happy to sell paper. I'm happy to sell consulting services. I'm happy to sell, limousine rides basically in electric cars. So I think a true entrepreneur is happy to sell whatever they have in front of them. And the passion is the project. It's not always that it's the product. I mean, I love selling paper. It does a lot of cool things and saves a lot of people a lot of money, and is good for the environment because of what we do. But at the end of the day, could I switch gears and sell something else? Absolutely.
So sales is a huge part of entrepreneurship.
I think so. I think if you can sell, you can start a business and be successful. And the key is, for me, getting on the phone and selling. And what I had to do at the beginning was set the alarm on my phone. And from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock every single day, I would get on the phone and dial. And it didn't make a difference if I made $1 or 100,000. It's like, you will dial until the clock hits the next hour. And sometimes you're on a roll, and then you roll that into another hour. And sometimes it's painful. You get a lot of people hanging up on you and saying awful things. And you say, yep, understood. I totally get that. And, but you got to dial till the end of the hour, because that was the discipline it took to get the ball rolling. And once I had a nice base of customers, they would start to reorder, which was really helpful.
When you're calling and you're confident and you're excited about your project, maybe you're a little, your product, maybe you're a little nervous too, and you get rejection after rejection. What kind of a mindset do you need, or how do you overcome that?
My trick is hang up and dial again. If I would let it hit me in the soul, it would be a little crushing. And then it would take me a few minutes to recover. And I'd want to go walk the dog and get some fresh air. And I could come up with any excuse not to dial again. But the truth was, I just had to tell myself, this is a numbers game. I know that a certain percent of people will buy. And so I just need to hang up and dial. And the soonest I could do that was the sooner I could get rid of the memory of the last one that didn't go well. So hang up and dial, hang up and dial, hang up and dial. And it truly works. I mean, I don't know if that would be what a professional like call center person would tell you, but that's what really works for me.
So we've talked about a few very important elements in entrepreneurship. What are, just as a kind of a final question, what's kind of a final piece of advice you would have for somebody who has a good idea, maybe a good job that they like, but they want to branch out on their own, but maybe are a little bit frightened? What's like a overall piece of advice you'd have for them?
My piece of advice to that person is to get your product in front of as many people as you can. And I kind of touched on that earlier, but here's the key is that founders will often say, hey, I have a great idea, but I can't tell you about it. And I'm like, okay, well, that's as good as nothing, right? Because maybe everybody else has the same idea, but it's the person that executes on it that will make the money and will become successful. So don't be afraid to tell people. And the reason is they're not going to steal your idea in all likelihood because they're not interested in that type of product. They are already working on projects of their own. They've got a million things to do. They're not likely to rip off your idea. And I can't stress that enough. Like anytime I create a new product, which is regularly, I tell everybody I know, and people are like, well, aren't you worried somebody's going to steal that? And I'm like, it's a very low likelihood that they'll steal it. And B, that's A, and B, I'm going to execute on this faster than they can. So bring it on. With my first company, Guerrilla Tags ID Systems, we were the tiny guy. We were going up against people way bigger than us, but they actually helped us make a market because their advertising told everybody that they needed this type of product. And then my advertising told them that our product was better, and it was. And so competition can be a really good thing if you leverage it properly and if you know how to think about it. So tell everybody about your idea. They're not going to steal it, and they might buy one, and they might introduce you to somebody that makes a big difference in your business.
Who are some colleagues and mentors that you respect and have helped you along the way?
The number one I would say is, and I don't like to name drop, but this is the best example I can think of for you, is I met Sarah Blakely at a conference in San Francisco, and she's the founder of Spanx. And I was kind of chit-chatting with her, and she said, Kyle, you really need to join this group called Entrepreneurs Organization. And I was like, yeah, I've heard about that, but it's like 10 grand a year after everything. And I just don't want to spend $10,000 for a fraternity or buy my friends or, whatever you want to call it. Didn't sound good to me. And she was like, okay, how about this? If you join EO or Entrepreneurs Organization and you don't get $10,000 of value or more, I'll buy your membership for you. And I was like, okay, that's a pretty good endorsement. And so I did join, and she was 100% right. And EO has some requirements to get in. You have to have $1 million of sales every year, among a couple other things. So if you're not there yet, see if you can join the EO Accelerator program. You get access to incredibly smart people. They help you for basically nothing. They'll be your customers. They'll be your biggest advocates. And man, after joining that, like the connections that I made on a regular basis are phenomenal. And, my personal forum, which is a group of 6 of us, and that's a subset of the Colorado chapter, we meet once a month. We hold each other accountable for things. And then actually this Thursday, we're going on a retreat. So it'll just be the 6 of us going. We're going to be talking about business. We're going to be solving each other's problems. Hey, I've seen that type of thing before. Here's what I did. Here's actually the CEO of that company. I got his cell phone number. Let me put you in touch right away. That way you get the white glove treatment. Those types of connections are invaluable. So join a business group of some kind. Join EO Accelerator, or one that fits you.
We have been talking to Kyle Ewing, the founder of TerraSlate. Kyle, where can people find out more information about TerraSlate and about you?
You can reach me. My personal email is kyle.ewing@terraslate.com. I'm always happy to talk shop or give you feedback on your project, if you're able to say what you're working on, of course. And the website is terraslate.com, TerraSlate. And if there's a project I can help you with, I'd love to. So feel free to reach out.
Okay, sounds great, Kyle. Hey, thanks so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Chad. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So long, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Top Business Leaders Show, powered by Rise 25. Visit rise25.com to check out more episodes of the show and to learn more about how you can start your own podcast.